So we're beginning our tour of northern Spain here in Catalonia. You can see the Pyrenees behind me, and that's the direction we're going to head. We're going to head all through the mountains to the other side of Spain and see how many stone circles and dolmen and menhirs such as this one we can see along the way. We started yesterday in the Guevaras Hills, which is about 60 kilometers south of here near the town of Palamos, and there are quite a few dolmens scattered all over those hills there. And now we've come here not far from the France border in the Cap de Cruz National Park, where there are loads of dolmen and standing stones such as this one. Now this one's quite interesting because it's got this kind of line of quartz running through it in a kind of V shape. So we wonder if that has anything to do with the piezoelectric effect that some people talk about. Now, there's a dolmen down the hill here, which we're going to have a look at now, which is absolutely huge. And as I said, tons scattered all over this hill, which we're going to spend a couple of days looking at before we head through the mountains to see what other megalithic monuments they've got in the north of Spain.
We spent about 15 minutes walking down to the dolmen, and we passed a number of different standing stones along the way, although one really could have just been a stone mounted in some concrete.
So this is a dolmen not far from where we just did the introduction, and it's probably one of the biggest dolmen I've ever seen. It's humongous. I mean, that stone there is probably, it's got to be like 8 or 9 tons, and this top one is probably 10 tons. Maybe even more. It's hard to tell because like the density of the rock and stuff.
So you feel the stone for just a little.
Yeah. What do these have? Some have energy in them and stuff, and like these have got cut marks. These are cut marks here, and cut marks. Some people, alternative people, talk about cut marks being like deflectors of energy into different directions. Yeah. And there's one on the outside on this massive stone on the other side here as well.
From the Crudo and Corbetella dolmen, we passed another standing stone and roses, before driving to another Ruta Megalithica, where we began hiking on a trail leading through a valley scattered with stone tables.
So this one looks to have had a stone tumulus built around it. Look. It's pretty obvious, this one. I think there's a couple more over there. So we've just come to the other side of one of these massive hills from where we did the introduction, and we've walked up through this huge valley here, and we've seen quite a few dolmen along the way. We've seen 3 so far, but there's tons more. There's signposts all over to all these big dolmen, but there's tons of other ones that are not so famous. This one's only got 4 orthostats, or 3, but there's other stones over here. In fact, there's all sorts of stones here lying around. Maybe there was a tumulus on this one. You could say that that was a stone at the bottom, but you generally don't see that in the dolmen in Europe. I saw it in Jordan, but that's likely to be an upper stone, upper orthostat that has fallen. Another cut mark. We keep seeing these on the dolmen around here. So this one's just up from where I was just talking. Another one even further up the hill, as you can see. This one's also part of a former tumulus, you would think. All these stones. It seems to have 2 capstones across the top, and I'd like to point out how there are also, as we're walking through all these valleys and stuff, tons of other stones that might have just been overlooked in terms of whether they were dolmen. I mean, this here looks like a mound, and you've got all sorts of other stones that could have formed a dolmen down here, and then you've got the dolmen that I was just talking at over there.
We ended up camping in the valley so that we could visit some of the other dolmen in the morning.
So we're here at a dolmen called Vignes Mortes 2, and we've come to this one to show how dilapidated they can be. Even this one here has been reconstructed a little bit, and it makes us wonder how many were scattered around these hills when they were originally built, because a lot of them could just be ruins and look like stones. And it also makes us think as well, like you've got what looks like from the outside a kind of a stone tumulus, but we wonder if this was built when the original dolmen was built, or if possibly this was like 500 years ago and some people have come in more recent times and adapted it for their needs. But it's an interesting spot, but there's plenty more to see, so we'll go on to the next.
We then drove to another area with a number of dolmen about 10 miles away.
We're about to head towards the Pyrenees, but we thought we'd have a look at this dolmen here first. It's got about 6 or 7 orthostats, probably not within a stone tumulus like we've seen in some other parts of the national park. So the dolmens seem to be varied. Sometimes they're part of the tumulus and sometimes they're just out on their own, such as this one. The capstone is probably about 6 or 7 tons. The stone at the back is probably 5 tons. So again, it makes us think, like, how the hell did they move these stones around this area and get them up this hill if they were supposed to be just using rope and trees to pull them along? And don't forget, this area would have been completely covered in forest as well. So yeah, these dolmen, there's not much to talk about really, only a few statistics about them basically. But it's when you look at the bigger picture that these become interesting, because they're not only covered all over the north of Spain, as we're going to show you, they're covered all over the planet as well. They're in Colombia, Korea, Canada. The list of countries is pretty long. So there's one more just around the corner here. So this is that other dolmen. It doesn't look much like a dolmen to me. It looks more like the remains of a dolmen with sort of 3 orthostats and then some sloppy building work in this dry stone wall on the outside. Right, so we're on our way to the Pyrenees and we've stopped at a couple of megalithic sites that we weren't aware of, that we just saw from the side of the road basically. There's a menhir called Cuera Fumat, and we thought this one is interesting because it's so small basically, and it makes us wonder again how many there are in this area that were menhirs. You know, when these were originally built, how many would there have been? And it's also right next to a dolmen. They're a few meters apart, which again makes us the point of how the stone circles, the dolmen and the menhirs all kind of grouped together basically. So as you can see, the dolmen is over here. It's quite a small one, but it shows us how much variety we have in the dolmen. I mean, and the menhirs as well, they come in tiny sizes and they come in huge sizes. This one, you know, it's what, 1 meter tall. This capstone's probably only a couple of tons, but in other places around the world, the capstone can be up to 300 tons, and these can be the size of coaches.
We then ascended up into the mountains looking for somewhere scenic to camp.
So this is the view from my tent. Day 3. There's the Norwegian smoking room.
We spent a day covering a lot of miles, passing through one ski resort after another. We passed through Andorra, where I couldn't resist eating flakes in another country. Then we continued on through the mountains to get to our next site.
So last night we drove deep into the Pyrenees. We've just passed a town called Béret, so shows we're not far from the French border. And also at the top of the mountains you can still see some snow, even though it's Spain in the middle of August. Now we were driving along this road looking for a couple of standing stones. In fact, there's 3 of them and we only found 1. And while looking for the other 2, we ran out of light and decided to camp. And it just so happened we were camping opposite a stone circle and some tumulus on the other side of this river. So all of these sites are spread out all over the north of Spain, and there's so many of them. So it's a beautiful area. We're going to take a look at the rest of the standing stones as we head out of the Pyrenees, ready to check out some different areas, some other hotspots of megaliths. So this church is in that valley we slept in last night. We were just speaking to somebody who works here, and she was telling us how this area is famous for ley lines and telluric energies. This church has lots of stories over the years to do with witchery and alchemy. So it ties along with this idea that we've been seeing all these megalithic stones or possible megalithic sites and tumuli. Right, so we're just driving out of that valley where we camped last night, and we found one of the stones that we couldn't find when we were driving in. There's not much to say about it really. There's lots of red lichen growing on it, which is an interesting thing, and something that we've seen in other areas where lichen grows on areas where there seems to be ley lines or telluric energy. So you can see the ski lift in the background, so we're obviously up really high, and this whole area would be covered in snow for probably like 7 or 8 months of the year. Beautiful scenery, but we're going to carry on heading out and find the next spot where there are more megaliths such as this one. Just driving past the one we saw last night.
Finding our very own little stone circle made us want to see more, so we headed west where the majority of them are found, but we stopped en route to see an isolated little dolmen surrounded by some stunning scenery. Next day we went on the hunt for a hard to reach and hard to find dolmen whose photos had intrigued me when I was researching this trip.
So we're deep in the Pyrenees now. Behind me you can see a valley which leads off into France. Now we've basically driven most of the way through the Valley d'Etio and then walked up the last few kilometres to this really isolated dolmen, which is quite unique and is going to become one of my favourites, I think, because I've never seen them made out of this type of stone before. Usually they're made from a solid kind of granite kind of stone, but this one is almost like a conglomerate of smaller stones cemented together with this red kind of adhesive. And we've seen it as we've been walking up through this valley, all sorts of rocks, boulders, basically the whole mountain is made from this type of stone. So it's kind of sunk, this dolmen. You can see in there is much deeper than the ground, but there's all sorts of stones which could suggest that this is a massive tumulus. Now at the end here we've got part that's broken off. This would have slotted in there, and as you can see this is the kind of conglomerate of stones and this red adhesive. Now we're going to head back down through the Valley d'Etio, and it's an area that's scattered with megaliths. There's stone circles, there's dolmen, there's menhirs, there's tumulus, there's all sorts of carvings in the rocks, there's caves, there's a river running through it. It seems like it's a bit of a megalithic hotspot, and there's a lot of ticks on the list if you're into these kind of things. So we're going to head down that way now and take a look at some of those on the way out of this absolutely amazing valley.
Just 500 metres further down the hill there were another set of ruins.
So this is Salto Dolmen, which is what they say is a dolmen still encased in its tumulus. Down here is what they would say would be the capstone, and then obviously the tumulus is surrounding it. There are people that think that all of the dolmen were encased in tumulus at some time, and that the tumulus is washed away in all the dolmen that are around the world without a tumulus, which is the majority of the ones I've seen. Mostly it's in France and Spain where they are within the tumulus, I think. So over the other side of the river there are tons of stones which look like they could be dolmen, and there's definitely two in there somewhere. There's also some menhirs and some stone circles, but we haven't got time to be having a look at those, unfortunately. So we're going to continue down through the valley to another spot. So we've come down a bit lower in the valley to a part where it's very foresty. And over here is a stone circle. A very small stone circle, about 6 or 7 meters across, tiny stones, probably about 25, 30 of them. And then over here is another area with some more stone circles. So Robert is going to show us where he thinks the stone circles are, because it's hard to work out where they are.
I believe the biggest one to be here, like a 5-meter diameter, approximately.
5 meters?
Yeah. You see this line of rocks here?
Yeah.
And it kind of stops here. However, it picks up here again, and it appears to be a smaller one here along this line of rocks.
So do they overlap, those ones?
No, they are more or less
Just
right
touching?
next to each other.
Right.
So this one keeps going over here, and there's a few more rocks here. You can also kind of see the outlines of a third one here, a small one.
Mm.
2 rocks here, one there, and yeah, one there, 2 big ones here, and that makes 3.
We were almost at the other side of the Pyrenees, and we went to our first of the many groups of stone circles. When we arrived, they were hiding in the clouds, but luckily they cleared up so we could film.
So we're deep in the Pyrenees again, not far from the French border, at a place called Aspegui. And we've come here because there are quite a lot of megaliths in this area. There are 5 or 6 dolmen, there are some tumulus, there's a menhir, and there's tons of stone circles. We're not sure how many exactly, probably in the area of 15. Behind me you can see probably about 10 of them, but I'm being vague because there are a lot of sort of half stone circles or tumulus or stone circles that look like they've been buried. I think there's quite a lot under the ground in this area. So behind me, as I said, you can see 10 of them. I'm going to show you where they are exactly now. Around this area here you've got what is, I think, 8 stone circles. You've got one here, another one right here. They're all attached and they seem to be in some kind of formation like in Adam's calendar. Obviously it's not quite the same degree as the many of stone circles as they have down there. So you can see this is 1, 2, 3, this would be 4, there's 5, 6. These 2 here for some reason have 2 larger stones in them, but we're not sure if this is actually just because they've eroded less than the rest of them. Maybe when these were originally built they were all the same size. It's hard to tell really. So we're talking like 6, 7, there's one here which would be 8, there's another larger one in that direction which would be 9, and then the largest of them all is this one over here, which is probably about 10 meters in diameter. I'd say there's probably about 50 stones, 45, 50 stones, and there seems to be this hillock or this kind of tumulus in the middle of it.
We continued to another area covered in megaliths in the valley of Baztan, and we visited a museum with a standing stone and a display showing all the ancient rocks in the area. We spent a day trying to find some of the more photogenic ruins but didn't have much luck. But the next day we hit the jackpot.
So we're on the west of the Pyrenees now, just south of San Sebastian, at an area where there are tons of megaliths. You can see this amazing site behind me, but these hills over here are completely covered in stone circles and menhirs and dolmen as well. As we've been coming to the west of the Pyrenees in this part of Spain, the number of stone circles has been increasing quite dramatically. We spent a couple of days trying to find some of them, and they're really quite difficult to find up dirt tracks, up some of these hills, you know, that the roads basically don't go to. Today, luckily, the tourist board are very good, and they advertise their megaliths very well. They're very proud of them here in Spain. And we've got a walk that's taken us about an hour and a half up one of these hills, and we've seen some dolmen along the way, and now this site here is quite amazing. It's one of the nicest sites I think I've seen in my travels. We've got at least 4, possibly 5, 6, 7. It's hard to tell. We'll show you in a minute what I'm talking about, but there's probably 5 or 6 stone circles, and there's a couple of dolmen at least. The first stone circle is here. It looks like there's a lot of damage that's happened to this site in particular. There's a stone circle here. There would be another one here with these 2 kind of larger stones, larger than the rest of them, and we're not sure if that was done on purpose, like when these were built these were 2 larger ones, or if it's just that these have eroded more dramatically over time. But there are other circles, this one over here for example, where there are stones that seem to be larger than the majority of them, so it is quite possible that these were, you know, created like this on purpose. So there's another stone circle over there with that large stone. There's another little one here, but this area here is quite hard to tell because there are lots of stones here, and there's, as I said, quite a lot of damage. So one here for sure, another one here. So that's 4, and there's also stones in all these trees over here as well. So it's really hard to tell how many stone circles there are in total. Now what we're walking on here is a massive hill, or what actually looks like a tumulus. Around the outside it's a circular hill, and there's around the outside lots of smaller stones, and it looks like grass has just basically grown over a tumulus. And over here there are a couple of dolmen. This one here is the most obvious one. It's obviously been destroyed, but you can see the obvious orthostats and the capstone. And then there's also some over here that it's in complete ruins, but the reason we think it's a dolmen is because the dolmen seems to be made out of a different type of stone. The type of stone that we saw in Valle d'Etna, where it's like conglomerate that's been stuck together with some kind of red adhesive. And then there's some other stones as well that are completely different to the rest, and we wonder how far they have had to bring these stones. I'm sure they're not from Valle d'Etna. I'm sure there's other places in the Pyrenees that have this type of stone, but certainly not around here.
We climbed up one of the hills in the area to visit our last group of stone circles.
Okay, so we're just descending down out of the west of the Pyrenees now, and we've stopped at a site where there are supposed to be about 21 stone circles. We've only managed to find 12 or 13 maybe, because they're scattered all over this hill you can see behind me. And as we visit more of these stone circles in this part of the world, we notice how they're a lot different to those in the UK. The ones in the UK are huge and usually 60 metres or 100 metres even, whereas these ones tend to be sort of between 3 and 10 metres across. This one's probably 6 or 7, made up of about 30 stones. We do notice similarities with other stone circles like in France and in England, where some of them seem to be different. For example, you've got most of them are made out of this white rock, but then there's a grey one here, and possibly one over here too. So it seems to be like, as in other parts of the world, they're singling out certain areas of the circle. Now we're also noticing that they tend to come in clusters as well. As I said, there's supposed to be 21, and there's one just over here about 10 metres this way. There's this one, and then as we walk down here you can see there's another 7 or 8. So this one's the first of probably about 8 that are going off in this direction here. It's probably the largest one down here. This one's about 8 or 9 metres across. It's quite difficult to see because there's so many ferns around, but you can follow it, I'm sure, on camera, how it goes around here. I'm right in the centre of it now. And then as we walk over here, there's some more of a similar but slightly smaller size. This one is probably 6 or 7 metres across, and again a couple of them seem to be made out of a darker rock. This one here is completely made out of darker rock, although there's the occasional one that's made out of this white kind of crystalline kind of rock here. So interesting that they come in clusters, interesting that they're completely different size, but there does seem to be similarities with other stone circles in other parts of the world. They tend to form patterns as well. We're not sure exactly if the patterns match anything in particular, like the stars, for example, or maybe even we wonder about Adam's calendar and the different circle formations that are down there and how they're possibly related to energies coming from the ground and somatics and sacred geometry and that kind of things.
We left that area teeming with megaliths and headed south to visit a few more sites before we ended our trip.
So there's a massive couple of stones in here, the two that are being held apart by this iron girder. This one, large and thick, it must be about 8 or 9 tons. This one at the back here, probably 4. And this one, which is breaking up because of this big crack down it. It's in 4 parts now, but it would have been huge. This one would have probably weighed over 12 tons, I would think. And the capstone, which seems to have some sort of erosion on the bottom of it, but this is probably 7 or 8 tons as well. It's not set in the nicest of places, next to the motorway, but it's a cool and large dolmen nonetheless. So this will probably be the last dolmen we see on our tour. We're not far from a town called Salvatierra. This is completely different to a lot of the ones we've seen as we've been driving through the Pyrenees. Not only is it not up high or at the top of a hill, it's completely down in the lowlands. It's also really tall. It's probably 2 or 3 meters tall. It's made from this white crystalline rock, but it's important to show how they're completely distributed all across the north of Spain. But not only that, they continue into Portugal. If you jump across the waters, they've been found in Colombia, the United States, Canada. If you keep going around, there's 30,000 of them in Korea. Then they're found in India, Russia, Turkey. I mean, they're all over the planet, which when you consider that makes these things that are on their own not so fascinating. It makes them a little bit more interesting.
When we arrived at our last site, finding it seemed almost impossible due to the thick fog, but we had a look anyway, although to no avail, so we ended up camping, hoping to find it in the morning.
So this is Mendeluz Cromlech, not far from Salvatierra and the last dolmen we visited. And we've come to a site which is a kind of a combination between a stone circle and standing stones. We're not exactly sure if this is what it would have looked like when it was originally built. It's only dated at 690 to 810 BC, but we always doubt the official aging of these sites because that's just, you know, they've found objects here and they've dated those, but it doesn't necessarily mean that those people built the structures originally. But we've looked at the standing stones here and they seem to be aged quite a lot and very similar to all the megaliths that we've seen across the north of Spain and France and the UK. So this is as far west as we're going to go. We're going to have to end our tour at this site. We've seen some really, really interesting sacred places. We've been to a couple of places where there was stories of witchcraft and alchemy. So there's definitely some sort of association between a lot of these places full of megaliths, these hotspots, and the more sort of spiritual aspect of our being. We've seen so many dolmen and standing stones, stone circles and tumuli all across the Pyrenees, all across the north of Spain. And they do continue, like the dolmen. There's stone circles and menhirs keep going across the north of Spain. They're found in Portugal. Menhirs are found all in Colombia and Russia, Korea, India, all across Europe. Stone circles have recently been found in South Africa, the United States, and they're in Armenia. And again, there's a global distribution of all of these megalithic sites. It's quite incredible when you look at the frequency and the distribution of all of these megalithic sites. Like the north of Spain, it's completely covered the planet.
Our trip was over, so we drove back to Catalonia, where the Norwegians flew home and left me to visit one last site.
So I'm here in a town called Peretillada, not far from the Guevara's Hills, which I mentioned at the beginning of the film. And I've come here to show you a slightly different site to all the megalithic ones we've shown you so far. They're an interesting structure. They just look like carts have basically carved these tracks in the rock here. But we wonder if there's a different explanation. And on the History Channel documentary, Ancient Aliens, they mentioned that there could be a different reason for this phenomenon. And this one looks very similar to some of the ones we videoed in Malta. So we're on the west coast of Spain now. Oh fuck, no we're not. So we're on the west side of the Pyrenees now, just north of, no it's south.
Easter Island type of guy. You imagine his eyes being here, his nose, his mouth.